Making headlines this past weekend, and South Africa announcing its intention to withdraw from the International Criminal Court, basically meaning that the country will no longer be bound by the Rome Statute of the ICC. In a notice to the United Nations on Thursday, the government says its obligations with respect to the peaceful resolution of conflicts are incompatible with the interpretations given by the ICC. We're joined in studio to get a better understanding now by Advocate Michael Masutha. He, of course, is the Minister of Justice and Correctional Services here in South Africa. Minister, thank you so much for being with us. It's good to have you in studio.
And thanks for the opportunity as well.
Minister, there was, I think, a very mixed reaction to South Africa's announcement yesterday and its decision to withdraw from the Rome Statute. What was the thought process behind this decision?
Well, it was not just a thought process, it was a whole process that we went through. Obviously, it was initiated by South Africa receiving last year, June, President al-Bashir, who came to attend an AU summit, which South Africa was hosting in Johannesburg. And we were firmly of the belief at the time that international law affords him diplomatic immunity, and that he had every right to participate at such a forum, and that as a country we did not have any right to deny any legitimate member of the AU that opportunity. But of course we're taken to court, and we were subsequently are judged to have been in breach of our obligations in that regard. So that has resulted in a number of processes. You'd recall amongst them was a decision of the ruling party at the NGC in October last year that we should take all other steps in this regard preceding ultimate withdrawal if they did not yield any results. And that's exactly what we did. In November last year, for example, we went to The Hague. We requested the Assembly of State Parties, which were a member as a country, to actually assist us in providing final interpretation to remove the uncertainty between Article 27 and Article 98 of the Rome Statute, which seemed to conflict as to whether or not sitting heads of states enjoy immunity despite the provisions of the ICC statute. And of course, they did not come to our avail. They referred the matter to the Bureau. We engaged with the Bureau. We didn't make any headway. And it's a long story, but to cut it short, we are where we are now. We have come to the conclusion as a country that there isn't much we can do other than to actually remove ourselves from this impasse, which is an impasse even in terms of our own domestic law.
Minister, we need to, let's talk about the decision now, because I think a lot of people are very worried about South Africa withdrawing. When you look at South Africa, we're often lauded for a country that has, wonderful human rights, and these crimes that we're seeing committed in countries that are completely against the human rights of the individuals. You have something like the International Criminal Court that protects them and that is completely against these human atrocities. Why would we want to remove ourselves from a body that is protecting human rights?
Especially having gone through a similar experience ourselves.
Exactly, including something like apartheid, yeah.
Well, the reality is this. We ourselves, as South Africa, achieved our own democracy through negotiation. Yeah. Well, there was an armed struggle, but along the way, there was a political settlement through negotiation. And we want, as a nation, to, if you like, export that experience elsewhere. We believe that many problems of the world can be resolved through dialogue. And to have a statute that says that you could invite warring parties here with good intentions to try and promote peace in a particular country, only to be served with papers that require you to arrest them and prosecute them or whatever, is not in keeping with our own international policy outlook.
Yeah. I mean, you look at a country like Darfur, let's just take that for instance. I mean, we're talking about 300,000 lives lost due to human rights atrocities. And this is the reality of having an international criminal court that needs to protect these kind of lives. You talk about diplomacy, you talk about talks and these negotiations, but they don't seem to be working. So there needs to be another mechanism. And if we do not support other mechanisms, how do we help the continent?
Do we want to become an international police officer who is going to enforce justice at all costs in the entire world? Do we have that capacity? Can we realistically arrest a sitting head of state in South Africa at the risk of perpetuating conflict in that country, or even provoking a war between ourselves and another country? Is that what we want to achieve as a nation?
Yeah.
I ask that question, and people don't seem to pay attention to that particular question, which is central. Many nations send their leaders to attend UN meetings in New York. Have Americans ever arrested a single sitting head of state on the grounds that they are in breach? Even with countries where they are at war themselves, there has never been an incident where somebody who in good faith visits a country with the intention of engaging in legitimate government business, who suddenly is impounded and arrested and prosecuted. It just never happens anywhere. Why should we be a guinea pig as this country? Why do we want to try something which for the last 1,000 years just never happens?
Yeah. Minister, just finally, I know we're running out of time, but let's take a fellow African of ours. I mean, we've got Joyce Aluche, who is now, of course, she's a Kenyan judge, and she was brought in as the vice chair of, or the vice president of the ICC, of the court last year, pleading for African countries not to leave the criminal court, saying, please stay a part of this. We need to get rid of these human rights atrocities on the continent. How do we sort of react to a plea like that, who has pleaded, and yet we are now, as one of the very first signatories of the Rome Statute, as you yourself has said back in 1998, now want to leave?
Well, it's not as if we didn't try. We engaged the ICC. We urged them that it is their responsibility under international law of interpretation to remove the apparent contradiction in the statute, where this very same statute at one level recognizes international customary law that affords or extends diplomatic immunity, and on the same breath seems to waive it. And we said we can't continue as nations to work in such circumstances of legal uncertainty on matters this crucial. But to no avail. What do we do? What recourse do we have as a country?
All right, Minister, so let's wrap it there for this morning. If all goes well and everything is abided by, as of the 19th of October 2017, we will not be a part of the ICC and we will not be a signatory anymore. Is that the plan?
That's correct. And okay. I need to clarify one quick one, and that is the assertion that the executive did not have the authority to actually unilaterally act as it did. People just need to read Section 231 of the Constitution. Only the executive negotiates and signs agreements, and equally, only the executive unsigns, if there is such an English word, such agreements. It is not a parliamentary function. We're talking of separation of powers here. Thank you.
Minister, thank you very much for joining us. Minister Advocate Michael Masutha, who's the Justice and Correctional Services Minister. Are you a Mamelodi Sundowns fan?
Of course, and we are
well done
all
to
excited.
them. It's awesome. Palesa's got the news from what happened last
night.
night.
At least there's something to celebrate.
Exactly.
Today.
Thank goodness for that. So, Palesa, make us happy. Let's celebrate. Mamelodi